Greg is going to put these questions up on their website for future reference, the ones that we don't get to. And there will also be an opportunity for you to enter into an ongoing dialogue from here. We all agreed when we started this that this wouldn't be a time that we would come completely to an answer. This would be a time mainly to spur you to think, to hopefully focus that thinking, get to some answers, but really ask more questions. Okay, so let me do this with you, Matt, first of all. What do you do in your time on Sunday intentionally to minister to your players and families? And then, this is somebody that has an academy in their church, and they said, do you think it would be different if that was a secular, like the secular league that you're playing versus a Christian gathering or a Christian organized group? Yeah. So what do you do specifically, and then how would it be different, do you think, if you were in a church environment?
That's all.
Yeah, that's a great, let's try to go 1 minute on the answers. Great.
So I've been with the club 11 years. After the first year, I almost got fired because they say I was being too Christian. So I had to make a decision at that point of being outwardly, overtly ministry-minded and sharing the gospel with those I work with, or to do it in a different way. So I decided, for longevity's sake, I had to take a different approach. So if I'm out on the field coaching, working, whether it's a Monday or a Saturday or a Sunday, I don't say because it's Sunday I'm going to have a service or anything like that. I'm working, I'm at work. So it's not my time to practice Sabbath. For me, Friday is my Sabbath day where I rest. My coaches know not to call me on Fridays because they know that I'm practicing that. So my ministry is in how I live my life and how I make my decisions. And it's through the core values of our club. And our core values are very intentional. And when I get a chance to explain why we're in sport, it's more on a philosophical level of sport should lead you to love, joy, peace, and hope. And when I get a chance, I explain to people why that is. And if I get a chance to share the gospel, then I can explain from a biblical basis. Our whole core values for our club is all pulled from the Bible. So I don't do like worship services or prayer times or Bible studies while I'm at work coaching and doing things like that. That's not when I do it. So my ministry is awesome.
Great. And if you need more information, obviously come up to these guys afterwards. Now, Greg, the question is to you this time. You said that there's ministry that's allowable on the Sabbath, and this question is, what would be some examples that you think would qualify for that?
It's a great question, and if you follow along with the Lord's expectations that we do not work and we do not cause anybody else to work, a good example of sports outreach, fitness, recreation would be activities that would be done on the Lord's Day that would not cause anybody to work, like a referee or a scorekeeper or anybody like that. The minister that's doing it can work in the same way that a preacher can minister or a teacher can minister. But we have to do, as Matt just indicated, there has to be another day of Sabbath for that person. But everybody else, we don't want to make them work. So then, let's take a young adult group and let's have an ultimate frisbee experience either prior to or after an evening Bible study and fellowship group. Let's have a couples volleyball experience. It could be a league in conjunction with a couples Bible study. Do the kinds of things that help the people be refreshed, renewed, and have that recreation. I think those are all very valid as long as we're not making people work.
Okay, great. The next question would be maybe to both of you all. What are some indicators as you move, whether it's on ministry on Sunday or whether you're doing things with your people? What are some indicators that it's gone out of, that has started to violate, you're like, I don't want to do that anymore. That's not now. So you say putting the word, give maybe some other indicators, or where do you go? I'm not going to go that far. Maybe that kind of thing. Both of you, does that make sense, the question I'm asking?
Yeah, for me, and just my work, and one of the reasons why I chose to work for this club and not another one is because when I first made a proposal to the board, I said I need to be able to make every soccer decision for the organization, for every player, and they agreed to do that. So every year I make all my staff turn in an annual plan and all their games and things like that. And I look at how many tournaments they're doing, and I say you need to drastically reduce the amount of tournaments. You can fulfill it is this day. So I try and provide balance for all the teams in our club from just a balance perspective, so that then it gives those families margin within which to practice family life and living and things like that. So it's always for me to from a big picture on an annual perspective to do that. And if I see teams that are out of balance, I'll challenge the coach on that. Hey, we're not here just to win trophy after trophy after trophy. We're here to develop these players and provide margin and balance in their lives. That's unlike what other clubs are doing.
If I understand the question correctly, in my mind, it's gone too far when somebody starts to judge their relationship with Jesus about how much didn't I make somebody work, or I get into that legalism and I start to put myself like I'm better than they are because I'm doing this and they're not. And I think that's the legalism that we really have to shy away from. It is a joy. It should be something that we want to do, that we get to do, rather than we have to do.
So there's a couple questions on this idea. Is the Sabbath Sunday is a specific day? Is it 1 hour, 24 hours, 12 hours? It's all really about defining the Sabbath, I think. So maybe both of you could speak to your definition of that.
Well, let me start in with that because I coached a man in high school, a young man in high school, was a Seventh-day Adventist, and we have some Seventh-day Adventist brothers and sisters here. And we changed our whole schedule for him because when you play high school games, but typically on a Friday night or Saturday, and because from Sabbath is Sunday or Friday sundown and Saturday sundown, if I've got it right to my Adventist brothers and sisters, shaking your head, yes, okay, that anything after that sundown on Friday until sundown on Saturday wouldn't be allowed. And so we changed our whole schedule for our young man to try to accommodate that for him. It moved, and you can read the stuff that I've written in the blogs and the books and all of that. Shameless, you can go buy a book back there. That it moved from Saturday to Sunday in the church for some pragmatic reasons, that there were only certain buildings, and since they were Jewish Christians primarily to start, they were using them for synagogue and Jewish traditions, and they needed to have another time to do Christian kinds of things. But even more so, if you know anything about Jewish history, the holy days, where we get holidays from, holy days were these incredible works of God that were so significant that we set a day every year to remember. So the resurrection and a few weeks later, Pentecost, were the greatest events ever. They weren't worthy of 1 day a year, 1 day a week. And as the Christians began to say, it was the day that the Lord rose, the day that the Lord descended, the day it became the Lord's day. And for 2,000 years, the church has said, it's the Lord's day. And so Sabbath keeps all of those things that are health-related and rest and relationship and all that kind of thing. Lord's Day is where we worship God, and I put it up on the screen. To me, that's where it's come from.
You want to add anything to that, Matt?
So the question is, what day is it?
Or is
So
it 24 hours?
Yeah.
Is it 12 hours? Is it light? Is it like, that kind of?
One of the things actually I learned through this whole process is Greg's helped me the difference between Lord's Day and Sabbath and accomplishing different things. So that really helped me early on in preparing for this. So for me personally, Friday is my Sabbath. That's my day of rest, and my wife and I will take that day off. I'll turn my phone off, and we'll do it. It's not a day I do corporate fellowship. It's not a day I do corporate Bible study, anything like that. That's the day I just unwind and rest and don't work. Now, the other stuff, the practice of the weekly fellowship things, for me, honestly, that's been a struggle, because if I'm working weekends and evenings, most churches and adult small groups are meeting in the evenings, so I have to work to find a fellowship. So I'm in fellowship on a midweek, maybe at a Wednesday at noon, we'll meet with some people to be in fellowship. Or I go to a Saturday night church for corporate fellowship, or a Sunday to fulfill that in my own life. And I share with our coaching staff as well, whether you're Christian or non-Christian, I say, hey, you need to make sure you have a day of rest for yourself. And one thing, what was the guy? I forgot the name, but he talked, I went yesterday, heard you, and today he talked about the big rocks every day. Put the big rocks in before 8 a.m. and you give yourself till 9 a.m. So the big rocks are the spiritual disciplines, and we need to understand what those big rocks are, and that we're practicing them on a regular basis, and that in our individual lives that we are aligned with God and His principles, and practicing those big rocks regularly and challenging those around us to be doing the same thing.
Quick follow-up. If I understand the sundown to sundown, part of the sundown is to prepare us for the next day, so that we're not out partying all night, Friday night or Saturday night, depends on your day, so that we show up for worship the next day and we can't do it. And so there's a preparation for it to get ready for the day. That's how important it is. Personally, like my wife and I, we try to always do the casseroles and stuff on Saturday, so we don't have to work on Sunday. So that all we do is we put it in the oven, set the timer, come home, and then we have our family worship after that. So I think that the Sabbath, the sundown to sundown, is helpful when we think about it. Tomorrow is so important that we got to prepare for it. Personally, we try to prepare ahead of time, but for us, it's kind of sunrise to sundown. It's kind of how we go about it.
Okay, would you put the next slide up?
Yes, un momento.
Okay. We hope this has stirred conversation. I mean, I think it seemed to me as if there was an energy going on as you're talking. We got a lot of great questions. We haven't even gotten up to the vast majority of them. But because, for the sake of time, we want to move on. And I'm going to call an audible here. We were going to do this in groups. But here's what I'd like you to do, because, again, the sake of time, we need to move on, because I want to give these guys an opportunity to give some closing comments. Would you do me this favor, just in deference to me and this calling me this audible? Would you pick a question there, and as we're in our break time here in about 10 minutes, would you address one of those questions with somebody else? Would you please do that for me? Okay? So if it's, did God change your heart or mind during this time? If so, how? Or what will you do to in light of this, to change or reaffirm your belief? I don't know about you, but I found myself really encouraged in one way, but also challenged to think more deeply about how I address my own approach to the Sabbath, which to me is the best goal for all of this, is that we would all just think more clearly and deeply about these issues. So would you please do that for my sake, just during the break? And now, Greg, why don't you I'll give you 5 minutes for your closing comments, and then Matt, 5 for you.
I wasn't quite prepared for that, Bob, but I'm going to go with your audible.
Sorry about that.
I think that one of the major, very positive motivations for people wanting to do their sports outreach stuff, their recreation, and their fitness ministries on the Lord's Day is to reach people for Jesus. And I'd like us to think about that for a second. If we go and we do these things to reach people, and we're not in church, and we're not, and again, hear me, one of the most overlooked and underappreciated is family worship that we can do on the Lord's Day. And I know you can do devotions with your family and your kids every night, but to really help your children understand what a special holy day this is, to do that. And if we are doing all these other things and we're not doing morning, evening, and afternoon, what we're really communicating to those people is it's not important. You don't have to do those things in order to be a disciple of Jesus. And the motivation is right, but how about when we think about this, that if we feel like we have to participate with them doing these activities, let's just think logically about the absurdity of that end argument. Because that means that in order to reach a drug dealer, we need to do drugs. And in order for us to organize these things, for people to do these things, not only do we have to take drugs with them, but we have to be the drug dealer to help them do this. And I have some significant questions about what we're ultimately communicating to people when we start to do these kind of things on the Lord's Day. Now I'm going to address something else that I think is really overlooked. Just think about what would happen if just a couple hundred of churches that are represented in Reach this year, if we created an alternative to Sunday sport, including regional and national tournaments, and including all kinds of activities, we could make an incredible dent in what we're trying to make a dent in. I don't like the fact that your sons had to say, I'm not going to participate in sport because of church. That to me is horrible on our part as a church to create alternatives that those kids can say it's every bit as good and it's even better. I throw it out as a challenge, Bob. What can we do to have an alternative that is known and that we do it as well or better than anybody else? Because your first slide of that coach, I would say, that guy hadn't been in church on Sunday because he's on an athletic field. Let's get him in church so he doesn't have to do that when we create the alternative. Those are two thoughts for some closing moments.
Matt, thanks, Greg.
I'm going to use this time to share about what I'm doing. And God spoke to me. I was at a conference, a coaches convention in January in Philadelphia. 30,000 coaches are a member of the United Soccer Coaches Association. But as I've been in a youth club for the past 11 years, I've seen the trend, and it's accelerating in the wrong direction. And there's definitely a change that needs to be made. So for 7 years ago, I came up with an idea for a league that would only be one game a weekend for a long period of time. And I've been working that for a long time. And just in the last 8 months, I've been working on launching that league. So a little bit of perspective. In Southern California, there's 350 soccer clubs, over 6,500 teams that are playing competitive sport. That's just in Southern California. And that's just affiliated. There's also a huge diversity and immigrant population, Hispanics, other countries that are playing outside of that also are playing multiple games on a weekend. So for the past 8 months, I've been talking to some of the top clubs and the directors about an idea that let's change the game and come up with a new format so we can provide balance for our families, balance for kids, but they can still play high level. And I was, in a couple of days, I went to a church in New York, and the guy preached about the banquet. And I just want to read the verse. It's in Luke 14. It said, a certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, come, for now everything is now ready. But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, I have just bought a field, I must go see it, please excuse me. Another said, I have just bought 5 yoke of oxen, I'm on my way to try them out, please excuse me. Still another said, I just got married, so I can't come. The servant came back and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant, go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. Sir, the servant said, what you ordered has been done, but there is still room. Then the master told the servant, go out to the roads and country lanes and compel them to come in, so that my house will be full. I tell you, not one of those who were invited will get a taste of my banquet. And because I've been going to the top clubs and trying to get their buy-in, but they all have their excuses. And at the end of the day, it comes out they're making a whole lot of money, and they don't want to change, or they're afraid of change. But change needs to be come. So I've actually launched a new league. I've spent several hours on the phone, even this weekend, talking to clubs who are calling me who like the idea of the concept. And I'm not telling them I'm doing this because I'm trying to restore something that's gotten completely out of control, and people don't know what to do. Families are torn, and like you said, my kids had to make a decision, but there should be some balance brought back, and maybe we can work together to do this. And I'm doing this kind of in the secular world, but with this league, then there's a guy named Ryan Live out of
Briarwood, Birmingham, Alabama.
And his church has some competitive teams, and I know Harry Demos here, their church has competitive teams, and they play in this environment. But perhaps we can create an environment where, not that everybody can have everything they want, but at least we can provide something from the church to provide something that has balance for families, and they can still not be fooled. We can do it in truth. And I read that thing because a lot of people are going to have excuses, and I'm putting my league out there to say, hey, if people see this and understand it, and I'll take anybody, because I know that change needs to come, and hopefully we're trying to do something about that.
Okay, Greg's got 2 quick things.
On the issue of freedom, we are free, but I ask you the question, are we free to disobey the Scripture? And the last thing I'll say is whether or not you have an affinity with Matt or myself, let's not let that ruin our relationship if you don't like what one of us has said. But let's continue the dialogue, because we're all in this together. We want to leave loving one another and trying to get to where we need to be. This is not a me versus Matt. It's all of us against the enemy to try to go where God wants us to go.
Thanks, Greg. And I want to give you a chance to affirm them in just a second, but I know that both of these guys have put a lot of time and effort and energy into what you just got to partake of. Trying to distill a lot of information and study into 20 minutes is a real challenge. So if you appreciated just what they've shared, how they've stirred you, could you give them a hand, please? And I do, again, just want to ask you to, even if before you go to the break in that group, to pick one of those questions. The second thing I would ask you is, if you found this to be a stimulating format, I found it that way. I've been stirred myself. It seems there's a really good energy. We're really experimenting this year, but we really felt strongly about it, and that this was going to be the direction we were going to go in for the future on Thursday. So if you found this to be helpful and stimulating, 2 things. One is let us know that. Secondly, if you have a topic of interest that you'd like for us to address next year, for instance, or in future years, please let us know that as well. So, and so let me just pray to close off the time. Could I do that?